Hello, everybody. This is Frank with Iron Age News. It is Thursday, April 23rd, 1:38 p.m. And we are talking about the downfall of yet another of the was fearsome, woke left attack dogs of people in the United States. They left their imprint on many a person, many an organization. People have lost jobs over this group. If we find out what we think we're going to find out, people may have actually been killed and injured because of the activities of the Southern Poverty Law Center. So let's talk about what they've really been involved in. I know that you are probably seeing the news on the most recent things, but if you were an older hand at this, you would realize that the SPLC has been around for quite some time. So let's just do that. So if you've been watching cable news, because networks like CNN have used them in the past, you've probably seen them cited as an authority on hate. Their reports are referenced by journalists and policymakers and even law enforcement in certain places, especially when it comes to white power. But now the authority is under scrutiny because the Southern Poverty Law Center isn't just being criminalized or criticized, it is being investigationalized. And that's what's emerging is raising a deeper question and one that goes far beyond any single charge. What happens when an organization that profits from identifying threats becomes dependent on the threat's continued existence? This is how we look at it because this is what they're doing. You have to keep the threat alive, right? So let's start at the beginning. For those of you who don't read USA Today, if it even exists, Southern Poverty Law Center was formed in 1971 by Morris Dees and an associate who later left and did a good interview on what Morris Dees was really like and about what the plan was over at Southern Poverty. And in its early years, the mission was pretty straightforward. We're going to chase the Klan. We're going to teach the Klan a lesson and blah, blah, blah. So sue the Klan, target openly racist organizations, and use court cases to shut them down. In fact, I think they went to the Supreme Court on a few of these. And to be clear, some of the work was real. They did win cases. They did bankrupt certain groups, but there's always a but. There's something else about Dees that often gets overlooked. He was not just a lawyer, he was a master of direct mail fundraising. And that changed everything because his model became identify a hate group, take them to court, publicize the fight, raise money to fight the next one. And here's where the critics started to notice something. A lot of these groups they targeted were very small. They were marginal because they'd have the name Ku Klux Klan in the title or whatever, Aryan something in the title. And they always have grand titles. So you will learn something about racists is that companies always have a great title, right? This was, as we used to say, three hillbillies sitting in a trailer yelling the N-word at a television. And Morris Dees was going to let no trailer park go unpunished if possible, because he was making Gitas, moolah, shekels, if you will have, on these things. And very marginal groups, not exactly national threats, but they made for great headlines and even better fundraising letters. You felt like you were getting something done if you put money into Southern poverty in the old days. And so by the 1990s and the early 2000s, they had evolved. It wasn't just suing hate groups anymore because they were getting a little thin on the ground. It was defining them. And this is where we've seen them rise to their fear during Trump won and even before Trump won with the rise of cancel culture through things like the hate map, which is what they have go on their site. They have what they call the hate map. The SPLC became a kind of gatekeeper. Media organizations relied on them, government agencies referenced them. And once the SPLC said you were a hate group, you were stuck. They said you were a Nazi or a Klan or a racist or an anti-Semite. It stuck, and it could mean a loss of funding loss of partnerships, being pushed off of platforms, as we know. Look at Kanye, right? And a number of other people who were also deplatformed. And here was the issue. The criteria for those labels was not always clear, was not always consistent. Groups like the Family Research Council were labeled a hate group over political positions, which sparked a bunch of debate. And even in organizations like, those of you on BitChute know it's coming, the Anti-Defamation League, which operate in the same space, uh, taking different approaches. So now you have a situation where one organization is helping to define who is outside the boundaries of acceptable society, and there's no real appeal process, right? The minute they say go, everybody is allowed to dogpile because they were considered a voice of legitimacy. At the same time, the SPLC became incredibly successful financially, hundreds of millions in assets, a national donor base, and a fundraising model built on urgency. If we don't get another $40 million in here, Hitler's going to show up and shit's going to get real, right? Because what does any of this have to do with Southern or poverty or law? Absolutely nothing, right? Look at the title, look at the name of the group, and look at the stuff they've done for the last so many years and figure out in your mind how it even means anything anymore. And so they'd have these action drive donations, and that created a structural tension. If your organization depends on a problem, what happens if the problem starts to go away? We had the same conversation, fair enough, have to mention it because I had mentioned it years ago, with the Wiesenthal Center. They are the group that was out hunting Nazis. I believe if we look again, you will find that that whole thing was supposed to stop with the end of the Nazis. Now, Simon Wiesenthal, I think his first name was Simon or Simon, whatever you want to call it. When he said Nazis, he meant Hitler and his pals. The people who inherited the company and the millions of dollars that went with it did not mean that. And this is what happens when you have institutions that are making more money than they spend. People take the job of head boss or on the board, and they're used to going on nice trips and places to have board meetings, and they want it to continue. So you have to keep finding Nazis and Klansmen, anti-Semites, and all these things. You have to keep finding them under rocks and bags of newspapers and stuff. Otherwise, we got to shut the company down. That's what happens when you have a mission driven or a project with a horizon, I mean, a sunset. Okay. So that's the issue. The organization depended on a problem. The problem's going away or even shrinking, which it was shrinking up until they started this up. In 2019, things started to crack. Morris Dees was abruptly fired. And then you can look up what he was fired for and then look into the scandalous rags and find out what everybody else figures he was fired for. There were complaints about workplace culture. Read that one out. Internal inequities, about leadership, and suddenly an organization that was built on exposing injustice, theoretically, was being accused of failing internally. I think they also had a problem with promoting anybody other than white people, but that's just me. Now, none of that proves criminal conduct, but it does raise a bigger question. At that point, you've jettisoned all the old luggage. The old boys that started the monster up are now gone. So what did the kids do, right? Was the organization as principled internally as it claimed to have been externally? So let's fast forward to today. The Department of Justice is reportedly looking at fraud, misrepresentation of donor funds, and most importantly, payments to individuals embedded in extremist groups. Now, Southern Poverty Law Center says this is normal. This is how we always do business. It's like law enforcement using informants, which you could understand to some extent, and in some context is possibly true. But here's where it gets complicated because this isn't the FBI. This is not the CIA. This is nobody who's got operators on the ground. This is a nonprofit that raises money based on fighting those groups. So the question becomes, at what point does monitoring become enabling? If you're paying people inside the extremist networks, you're are you sustaining them? A lot of people inside of these groups are welfare cases themselves. That's why they were so easy to beat in the court cases. They had no money. Racism from the white people in the United States hasn't had a day since like Woodrow Wilson or the last big dose of fraternalism. The Ku Klux Klan as a national organization, when you see those videos of the parade, look at the year they did that, right? There has been no money coming in, all money going out, no members coming in, all that shit. They are a beaten organization, but they have the name because they keep the name going. Same with the American Nazis, right? George Lincoln Rockwell was the last American Nazi, as far as I'm concerned. Go look at what he did, and you will not see any other organization out there today that operates in the same manner that he did. And also, our country is so much less free than we were during the quote unquote Nazi Nixon time period, where you would see a video of a discussion, not this pussy ass debate shit that you see now between a guy like Rockwell, who is no joke, he is for real about his racism, and guys like Stokely Carmichael, who is also no joke about his racism. And you could see them interact without having to have screaming in sessions and people throwing chairs, idea versus idea. So obviously the people were smarter in the 60s. Even the hippies couldn't bring it down, right? So back to this. If I'm paying supposed snitches, now, first of all, where are they in the operation? Are they the president of the operation? Because if you were to go out on your own and ask the FBI, if you would, or ATF actually, or DEA actually, hey, have you guys ever been able to get on the inside of a white supremacist organization? And they will tell you probably every third guy is snitching. That's why none of those groups were ever taken seriously by anybody else, because they knew they were riddled with informants. The federal government knew everything they were doing. And that's why when you see certain things that they blame on white supremacist groups, that's when you have to question what's going on. Okay. So now let's get back to the realities of this. So legally, this is going to be tough to prove, even if fraud is proven. Okay. Connecting that to actual violence, that's a much higher bar. You need intent, causation, and direct involvement. And the law is very strict about that for good reason. But legality isn't the only issue here, because there's something deeper. And this goes back to the hate march that occurred up there in, was it Virginia? The guy drove the car through, killed that woman, injured a bunch of people. It is coming up, and I can't say it's for real, but it has been intimated online that Southern Poverty was paying people who were the direct organizers of that event. If that were the case, and people will say, and your law AI will say the same thing, the actual killer of the people running them over with the car was tried and he was punished. However, in my mind, in your mind, you say, if Southern Poverty Law, if they did it, capital IF, if they paid Johnny Hatemonger, and Johnny put this event on and had the money for the permits and everything, because it was a legal event, unlike the stuff that you see out of any of the other left-wing groups. This was a legal event because they knew that they needed to have a certain amount of drama, and they wanted the police there so they wouldn't get stomped. And if all this was put into place with Southern Poverty Law money, doesn't Southern Poverty Law stand to be pilloried for putting this event together that allowed for the killing of these people or injury of these people, and then turned it around and tried to use that to overthrow President Trump? That's when you have your conspiracy people, and that's when you wonder what was really going on. Is it a red herring? If not, it's still worth looking at because even if they say, well, we paid these people for X amount of years, you are seeing today any American citizen who knows how to read will see that there were many interlocking sources of finance for left-wing and left-leaning operations occurring in the United States. So if Southern Poverty, let's say, got these Klans people off the ground, doesn't mean that Act Blue, who seems to be another major player, we'll just say that this is not for the lawyers, we're just making this up. Let's say Act Purple. Act Purple, maybe they decided to keep running with it. Maybe that's how it worked. Maybe that's what you needed to have happen. But these guys materially benefited by having hate continue in the country. So that should, in and of itself, if any group that these people paid money into blew up a bank, shot some old lady, whatever, threw gays off of a roof, any of the usual shit that these racist groups get up to, anything that they can find that was traced back to somebody having 20 extra dollars in their pocket that they got from Southern Poverty Law, they should be kicking the shit out of Southern Poverty Law in the courtroom. And if and when they never will find out who wrote the check, that person, if it's within statute of limitations, should also be taken out and have his ass kicked. The reason I stress this whole thing is not so much what Southern Poverty Law has done, but you can see how any organization now that wishes to finance terrorism in the United States can go about it in a way where maybe they'll get in trouble a little bit for fraud, but they won't get in trouble for the resultant violence and murders and property damage. And that should be what concerns everybody. I mean, I'm concerned with Southern Poverty Law, but I knew they were always lowlifes, you know? And it was a joke that they got away with it. Nobody ever challenged them, is what it was, because the Republicans were always such a bunch of girls, they wouldn't do anything. Look at the case, look at what they're doing. This is what you're going to see out of people that are going to sponsor terrorism in the United States. And in general, these hate groups, even if they were ineffective to some extent, it's the precedent. And we have smarter people than both of these groups, Muslim Brotherhood, CARE. They're working in the United States right now. And then for all of you Jew haters out there, because we still have a bunch of that going on, why don't you go out there and pillory groups like the Anti-Defamation League for using shitbags like the Southern Poverty Law Center to bring down your Uncle Tom when he wanted to yell the N-word out in the middle of a street someplace or get on the Jews about something else? There's your chance to shine. You have a legitimate reason now to look into that part of it. I'm just saying people have to stop living stereotypes. And if you're serious about something, you move forward with it. So that's all we have for you now. It's a little bit rainy out there today. I can't help you on that. And well, it looks like I got part of a beer, but there's actually the rest of it. That's about all. Have a good day.